Hey, this is Christopher McGee for Get More Awesome, Personal Training and Self-Defense. I just want to give you this brief kind of introductory video to ground fighting. That's why the camera's down here, on the mats on the floor. Get used to being down here for these videos. So, I want to explain just briefly the value of ground fighting. Now, first of all, most street fights end up on the ground. If you've ever watched a boxing match or a street fight, you see people, hitting each other. Pretty soon, somebody gets tired of being hit, just closes the distance and starts hugging somebody. In a boxing match, that gets broken up. Nobody's trying to take to the ground, of course. In street fights, that's when somebody starts trying to take the fight to the ground. Most fights end up on the ground, so when you get to the ground, your technique for fighting on the ground means everything. I have videos on Facebook where I invited a friend of mine who's got a 110-pound weight advantage, I believe it is, on me. He's got no ground fighting experience, but he's got a huge weight advantage, and he's a strong kid. And 5 or 6 videos I've got on there of I just invited Josh to try to control me, welcomed him to hit me, but above all, control me. And I think all those videos are less than a minute that it took me to submit Josh. So, it's a little bit different from stand-up fighting in that with stand-up fighting, I might be a great boxer or striker, and but I still don't want to go up against somebody that's 6 foot and 250 pounds at all. That's scary for me. I might be fast and good and know how to defend myself, but if I get hit once by somebody that's a lot bigger, it's bad for me. On the ground, it's a lot different. You can pull people in close so that their leverage for hitting you is kind of taken away, and then, man, strength means something, but on the ground, your technique just means everything. As a little bit of proof of that, a brief history of the UFC. Just a really brief history. So when the UFC started, it wasn't what it is today. Today you see 2 guys get in the cage and duke it out, and they both have a lot of experience in all kinds of fighting, both stand-up striking and ground experience. Well, that's because when organizations like the UFC started, the concept of mixed martial arts wasn't necessarily that everybody had an education in a mixed array of martial arts, but rather that you would take a taekwondo guy and a karate guy, put them together and see who won, and somebody would get the bragging rights. Now, originally that was all stand-up striking kind of fighters, until a certain man and family happened on the scene of the UFC, Royce Gracie, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter, 175-pound guy, going in against guys with huge weight advantages on him, and he just took the UFC, took the mixed martial arts world by storm. He was just submitting people, and nobody had a concept for what he was even doing, because most folks' concept of fighting at that time, at least in America, was all you stand up and you duke it out with your fists, maybe you kick each other and elbow each other, but tackling somebody and trying to choke them out or break something on them, people didn't have a concept of that kind of fighting, and so nobody even knew what was happening when Royce Gracie won until you watched a playback and saw that this guy got choked out, and nobody even knew what the submissions were called. But once he took that world by storm, it became obvious that if more fighters like that were going to be in the UFC, then everybody better be prepared for it. So mixed martial arts became kind of what it is today. And that's just kind of a bit of proof how valuable ground fighting is. Once you take a fight to the ground, everything changes. It doesn't matter how well you can kick. It doesn't matter how well you can punch. None of that matters on the ground. Everything is about how well you can control someone on the ground and capitalize on your submission options. So that's really important. Now, the videos that I'm going to be putting on, I'm going to put on some videos all about ground fighting. We're going to go in this order. I'm going to talk about the positions of significance on the ground. Then I'm going to talk about transitions, and then we're going to go over submission options in each of those positions of significance. That's what those videos will be. So to understand some of the difference, once a fight comes to the ground, there's all manner of positions that the fight can end up in. Some of those positions are positions from which you can execute a submission, and those positions are positions of significance, is what I call them. So positions of significance is going to be your first grouping of videos that you can see. And then transitions are when it's a movement, it's not a position, but it's a movement where you're in a position on the ground, a position of significance, and you want to get into a better position. So you transition into a better position. So we'll go over what those options are. And then there's what's called a scramble, where the fight's kind of on the ground, but nobody has a clear dominant position or a position from which they can execute a submission. So that you got positions of significance versus transitions versus scrambles. Okay? Now, also in these videos, once we get to the videos where, so as you're watching videos where we're going over submission options, and whenever you're training to do those submissions, whenever it's just practice and sparring, you get the submission that you want, or if you get the submission that you want, you only push it so far or hold it so long until your opponent taps out, okay? You don't say ouch, you don't say stop, you tap out when you're done, when you've been caught in the submission. So there's a difference between training, obviously, and actual self-defense positions. In training, you choke until the person cannot breathe and can't do anything else with the amount of time they have before they pass out to be able to get out of that position. That's when you should tap out, when you're being choked. In cranks or locks, you tap out, obviously, before your joint breaks or your bone breaks. But in self-defense, you don't wait for somebody to freak out or tap or whatever, right? In self-defense, in that kind of a context, with a choke, you'd hold it until they stop thrashing, and then I'd recommend you count to 10 or 30 or something, and then you get up and run away, call 911, whatever it is that needs to happen. With cranks, joint locks, that kind of thing, you don't find that position where the joint stops moving and gets really tight. You just go through that range of motion that you have due to your leverage for that particular submission, and you make the break happen. And that's the point of the submission in a self-defense position. All right, so just a quick recap. Value of ground fighting. Most fights end up on the ground. Technique on the ground means everything. I mean, it's staggering, the difference of people who do know what to do on the ground and people who don't. Your size won't matter much against someone who knows what they're doing on the ground. We talked about a brief history in the UFC that kind of made that point well, and then we talked about positions of significance and transitions and scrambles, and we talked about tapping versus self-defense contexts. All right, hopefully that was a good introductory for you guys for this ground fighting segment of videos that we'll have up, and I suggest next you look into the positions. Of course, feel free, once you've looked over everything, to just go back and look at what you need to as you need to. All right, peace out.